Chapter 17. The Gathering of the Q-uggalos. So there I am, floating along when I come up to this stinking, greasy drain pipe, which I manage to climb into and shimmy up until I come to one of those mad scientist-type laboratories, and I realize this must be what the local tribesmen called the lair. The lair of the Goo-Goo goddess, who I'm guessing is really the infamous and reclusive primatologist Galruti Burticus. And in the middle of the chamber I see a sort of pod tube deal, and inside of it is my affable Swedish chauffeur, Leif, who's naked and hooked up to some kind of a sick, sucking contraption that's extracting his life essence. Clam sauce, in other words, says the guy sitting to my left, whom I assume is Dennis Leary, although with the demonic clown makeup it's hard to be sure, and honestly, if it wasn't for his raspy vocal inflection, I might have guessed Ellen DeGeneres. He takes another drag on his smog pre-puff cigarette smoke diffusion device.
Everybody knows when you hear a story that mentions someone's life essence, that's code for clam sauce.
Then, through a thick cloud of blue vapor, he says,
"Sorry I interrupted you, Tinkerbell. So, you're in some sick underground laboratory in freaking Sumatra, and you find your Swedish buddy getting the clam sauce sucked out of him."
Now you, dear reader/listener, might recall that I normally make a point out of living this story that I call my life in the present tense, and this whole lair of the Goo-Goo goddess story is so last chapter. But I can tell by the way he's sucking on that smog device and nervously twiddling the little attached wheel that he could use the distraction. So I pick up this pipe that happens to be laying there, and I start clobbering the tube until it cracks, and this pink gelatinous fluid that looks and smells a lot like amniotic fluid, if I'm not mistaken, spills out all over the place. So I pull Leaf out, but right away we're grabbed by the Goo-Goo guards.
Those are the ones with the droopy tatas?
That's right. The missing link cryptids who live underground in the abandoned mines. So they take us to their goddess, who looks exactly like Phyllis DIller.
No kidding. I worked with Diller back in a Pixar in 98.
You didn't work with Phyllis DIller. Not in 1998, anyway. Technically speaking, you worked with renowned primatologist Galruti Burticus, who actually swapped places with Diller back in 1982, which they tried to cover up with some over-the-top plastic surgery and an elaborate cover story disguised as an autobiography.
Endnote 1.
So anyway, I'm carrying that curly dagger, right? Which is technically a pineapple knife, if you recall. And I hold it up threateningly, so the goddess and her Goo-Goo guards know not to mess with me, because I'm determined to get Leif and myself back to the extraction point, and the goddess clutches her chest like she's having a heart attack or something. And she points to the pineapple knife. And here I pause for effect while Bust-a-Nut leans in. And she says, "The Corer. The Corer."
Are you telling me this whole time you were setting up a punchline that's a pun based on a goddamn cinema reference?
It's more of a literary reference, actually.
Well, la-dee-da. Excuse me, Professor Brainiac. I didn't realize I was talking to an honorary doctorate in advanced snootery from Snob State. Let me ask you something. How long have you been working on that bit?
Oh, I don't know. Just 2.5 chapters.
How long?
Never mind.
Well, I hope you're not planning on using that kind of material with the knuckle draggers at this cuckoo convention. For a crowd like this, you gotta keep it snappy and as wacky as possible, okay? That's your only shot at survival. Not a lot of triple-digit IQs out there.
He points a crooked thumb towards the stage. As if on cue, a violent cacophony of bloodthirsty shrieking and guttural yowling erupts, loud enough to pierce through the thick bulletproof curtain, on the other side of which are the yahoos, the rabid rabble, the vocal yokels, the crypto-neo-fascist troglodytes known as the Q-uggalos. "Stand back and stand by," barks Armpit, holding the curtain as Drone drags a disheveled figure across the straw-covered ground. Maybe not too many double digits either, I say. Someone had the bright idea of putting the neo-fascist gang of militants known as the Proud Clowns in charge of security and logistics for the festival, and Drone and Armpit, wearing the signature form-fitting polka-dotted Fred Perry polo shirts and gigantic New Balance clown shoes, are the lucky Proud Clowns in charge of the Radio Hut Hardcore Humor Shack, which we in the green room have taken to simply calling the Mutant Hut. Looking at him lying there, sobbing and clutching the mangled chunks of papier-mâché and balsa wood, I'm about 90% that the pile of puppeteer on the floor, billed as Frasnugget the Puppet Massa, is actually Jeff Dunham. But either way, it reminds me of something Jeff Dunham once wrote, that life is a series of what-ifs.
Endnote 2.
I wonder if this bozo on the floor, Dunham or not, wishes his mother hadn't been so accepting of his affinity for playing with dolls. But I guess being a famous comedian means always wondering if you made the right choice way back when. Even I have to wonder, as I put the final touches on my psychotic clown face paint, if it's possible that I took a wrong turn at one of my life's what-if moments, especially when I think of how well things were going a couple of years back, meeting the Pope, getting roasted by Galifianakis at the Twain Prize. But every unexpected twist begets another unforeseen turn. Take this festival, for example. It would have never happened if Shaggy 2 Dope and Violent J hadn't gone on the Bro Jokin' experience and told a massive audience of low-propensity persuadable imbeciles, a.k.a. the golden demo of American politics, that a Buttigieg presidency would be wicked fresh, triggering a demographic shift in the Rust Belt, the Sun Belt, and especially the Tool Belt, just big enough to tip the election for President Pete and his "What Me Worry" message. In turn, the most regressive elements of the psychotic clown family splintered off, soon to be joined by other factions of dejected try-hard diehards of the collapsed MAGA movement, some who claimed to be simply concerned about the price of eggs, some with the sanctity of women's sports. But when faced with a devastating, humiliating, decisive election defeat, adopted the look and the lingo of the Q-uggalos in an endless, misguided effort to own the libs. Of course, it's a teeny tiny percentage of the American citizenry, nowhere near the numbers it would take to ever win a popular election, thank God. But a surprisingly diverse hodgepodge of weirdos nonetheless. Weird paramilitary authoritarian gangs like the Proud Clowns and the Sacred Promise Fulfillers, or weird special interest groups like Moms for Bigotry and the Heresy Foundation, or weird just kidding or are they troll cults like the Cro-Mega Chuds, who claim that former President Trump is the embodiment of the Greek god killer Kronos. Or the esoteric Kekists, who say he's the modern incarnation of the ancient Egyptian frog-headed god of primordial darkness, Kek. And don't confuse the Kekists with the cockystocracy, the Q-uggalo elites, the ones in the three-piece Armani clown suits with the slicked-back rainbow wigs, the disruptopreneurs and scamfluencers with the right combination of clout and inherited wealth to ride out the fluctuations of the crypto, finance, pharma, tech, sports gambling, and nicotine pouch sectors. Q-uggalo A-listers such as Speaker of the House-elect Marjorie Taylor Gates, Dunce Max News spokespatriot Tucky Gutwater, Professor of Mansplainology Jordan Shapeterson, Russian oligarch and deep-sea real estate developer Konstantin Chasm, and inventor-impressionist Phelan Brusk. All of them have gathered here together on a patch of wilderness in rural Georgia to form a temporary makeshift city for a ragtag army of unlikely like-minded losers. A megalopolis, if you will, a Q-uggalation of deluded dunces, all huddled together in the valley of the shadow of the statue, which was erected just in time for the festivities. And a massive erection it is, too. An erection to make Daddy proud. But what father wouldn't be proud of Vicious E and Donnie Two Dope? They might not be the most buoyant noodles in the pool, and God knows they're unlikable, but you have to admire the vision, the chutzpah, the short-sighted recklessness it took to launch the MAXXED ULTRA Testosta-boosted Dude-fuel 2026 gathering of the Q-uggalos, featuring such attractions as the Johnsonville Sausage Stop the Steal Bouncy Rotunda, the Old Spice Extreme Freedom Giant Water Slide, the Black Rock Troll Farm Petting Zoo, the Pit Viper VIP Vigorous Spanking Booth, and the Manscaped Ultimate Liberty Sheeple Shooting Gallery. Of course, there's also the various stages where festival attendees, or passholes, can enjoy the edgiest crowd work, hot takes, and hate humor that money can buy. Presented by a group of comics, or bozos to use the Q-uggalo lingo, that run the gamut from the straight bear type to straight up bears, which might have something to do with the fact that most of them are pushing gray market bootleg bear hormone replacement therapy on their podcasts. And far from the center of the action, from the so-called based camp, way past the ladies' footlocker Drain the Swamp beer garden and the Hobby Lobby orgy yurt. In fact, if we were any further from the action, we'd be on the other side of the electrified Pizzagate, unprotected from packs of cunning scavengers like the Young Turks and the Good Liars and assorted Daily Show correspondents. Out here on the outskirts of the festival grounds, the entertainment is limited to a handful of past-their-prime fire-breathers and stilt-walkers, and about a dozen washed-up stand-ups, the off-based bozos, here in the mutant hut. Take the stocky woman in the zombie makeup with salt and pepper cornrows and a hockey sweater emblazoned with a giant cannabis leaf, for example.
What are you looking at?
She snarls at me as she heads towards the stage. There's something familiar in her angry, nasally whine, and the way she's sucking down hard-boiled eggs and tossing the shells carelessly to the ground, forcing everybody else to walk on them. I remember Jeselnik mentioning a particular FC who had that habit. But there's no saying for sure, on account of everybody using nom du clowns with face paint to match, because everything in the hut is officially off the record. Something the promoters negotiated with the reps to give the talent, as in yours truly, plausible deniability if footage gets leaked, to curtail any reputational damage that might result from playing a gig that might be described accurately as being anti-democratic, racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, anti-Asian, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, insensitive to the disabled, demeaning to the Appalachian people, and in poor taste generally. So I can't say for sure that Deb L. Homicide is actually Roseanne Barr, just like I can't be 100% that the guy on my left is Dennis Leary, or that the guy to my right, who looks like a haunted Victorian doll in a black unitard and cotton candy-colored pageboy haircut, is actually Emo Phillips, or that the lady in the powdered blue tracksuit and matching curly wig over near the Twinkie Wiener sandwich buffet is really Elaine Boozler, or that the fella in the oversized diaper practicing card tricks is secretly Hannibal Buress. They're listed on the call sheet as Bust-a-Nut Thug, Skeezy Nugs, Chronic Darknaz, and Nug Bones, respectively. So I'll abide by the terms of my contract and try to keep up the kayfabe. Suddenly, Skeezy gets frustrated and tosses the parts of an old trombone he's been fiddling around with to the eggshell-covered ground. I ask him what's the worst that could happen. some kind of a mass casualty event or something. Everybody looks at me like I said something off limits, but come on. What do you expect from a gig that hands out bump stocks as part of the swag bag? Everybody's packing heat, and most of them are in some sort of drug-induced psychosis. But a gig's a gig, right? And I'm not going to mention the appearance fee, because I'm too classy to discuss figures. But the money is good. Real good. The best single appearance payout of my career, in fact. Really, a great deal of cash. Like my agent Gabby says, if you have to hang your head in shame, better to do it in a bucket of money. Or, in this case, dunce coin. So, fingers crossed that counts for something when we get back to civilization. The fact is, I would have taken this gig gratis. It was time to get my stand-up legs up and standing, following my brief time away from the spotlight, while my PR team handled the cleanup, cover-up, rebranding strategy, following that little dust-up in the Hudson. So when my agent Gabby mentioned that Russell Brand's slot at a new off-the-grid militant hillbilly shock comedy festival had opened up, I said, why not? Anyway, I was trying to cheer up Skeezy. Look, Skeez, I tell him, if we wanted safety, we would have gone into health insurance or something, right? You can't let the crazies call the shots, especially not these troglodytes. You know what they think comedy is? A bunch of gym rats talking into microphones 3 hours a day with no punchlines. Those bozos on the other stages couldn't write a joke if their human growth hormone prescriptions depended on it. At least we're legit punchline peddlers. Tell me one wisecrack from Theo von Hinchcliffe Segura that even comes close to your Golden Gate Bridge jumper joke. Since when did the bouncers take over the laugh shacks? Somewhere along the line, people started mixing up arrogance with comedy chops. Those guys aren't comics. They're vulgarians. Bust-a-Nut leans in and asks me to repeat that. Vulgarians, I say.
Vulgarians. I like it. I can do something with that.
Uh-oh. I should have known better than to get loose-lipped around Bust-a-Nut. I'm starting to imagine how Bill and Louie must have felt. But I get where Skeezy is coming from. It's easy to get worked up with all the fear-mongering going around with these paranoid nut jobs at this gig, obsessing about their current boogeyman du jour. Like current threat of the month Trantifa, for example. Is that what's got you worried? Look, Skeezy, Trantifa isn't even a thing. It's just something Dunce Max News and the moron industrial complex made up in order to line their own pockets. Assuming that's true, says Skeezy, looking around fearfully, then what about the Swifties? What if the Swifties get all riled up? They could wipe this whole festival off the face of the earth. Swifties? Personally, I can't think of anything less intimidating than a bunch of 18th century British satire enthusiasts. That's what I call a modest proposal. Let's get real, Skeezy. Chronic Dark Nez puts down her Twinkie Wiener sandwich long enough to chime in. She says,
Now, I don't like to throw around the term incel, but I will say with confidence that most of these fellas have never known the love of a woman, and it isn't by choice, if you know what I'm saying. And if I know anything about guys like that, and believe me, I do, then the main concern here is what they call a lone wolf attack.
Or even worse, says Skeezy, a whole pack of lone wolves working together.
I don't think you know what? Never mind,
says Darkness. Nug Bones says there's a lot of things that don't make sense. For example, he says he heard there was a TV show, a sketch comedy show, that was on the air for almost half a century that has somehow been erased from the public record, and only people who skipped the 8H variant vaccine can remember it.
Here we go, says Bust-a-Nut. You mean like the Branch Covidians? Those religious whack jobs covered in sores from all their exotic diseases. You think that group of geniuses knows the real story? You know what this is? When some people think they remember something that there's no proof of, it's called the Barbara Mandrella effect.
I make a mental note to give my crisis management team a nice bonus for the holidays.
Oh yeah, says Nugbones. Well, your ignorance is what makes you think you're smarter than you are. That's called the cunning drooler effect. If they lied to us about Horseshack Island, then what else are they lying about?
Bust-a-Nut becomes suddenly and visibly enraged.
Shut up! All of you, just shut up! Look, this whole little backstage gab fest, everything all of you are talking about is a bunch of nut job, conspiracy, bullshit. The only thing you need to be concerned about in the real world is the cabal of globalist reptilian pedophiles trying to steal your adrenochrome, all right?
Well, the only thing I need to worry about, I say, setting myself up for a classic Maloney wisecrack, is the wedgie I'm gonna get from my ill-fitting spandex catsuit. Everybody bursts into uncontrollable convulsions of laughter at my off-the-cuff and charmingly self-deprecating quip. But the backstage laughter is immediately drowned out by a massive roar from the auditorium. Not a roar of approval, but a cathartic wailing. Seconds later, Drone and Armpit return backstage with the domestic goddess herself on a stretcher, drenched in a pink gelatinous fluid, just like from that cave in Sumatra.
I never felt so alive,
she shouts nasally.
This is even better than Skankfest.
She's the only performer so far who apparently enjoyed her stage time. Part of me wants to ask her what her secret is, other than stealing Judy Tenush's shtick. But I think I already know the answer, and it's pretty close to my own. A pact with the devil, signed in blood, when she was 12 years old.
Endnote 3.
I don't remember reading about Bust-a-Nut or Skeezy or Chronic or Nugs Faustian bargains, but it would explain a lot. Armpit checks his clipboard and calls out for Jackosaurus Rex, a shabby, soiled dinosaur costume lying crumpled in a dingy corner, which I had assumed was unoccupied, slowly rises and trudges sadly toward the curtain. I turn back to Bust-a-Nut. So when you say adrenochrome, I guess what you actually mean is clam sauce? We share a little chuckle and high five. This guy gets it, we say to each other simultaneously. A couple of minutes later, the Kevlar curtain opens yet again as the proud clowns yank through the battered, lifeless dinosaur and pry off the dented head to expose the noggin of the oversized chuckle chucker. Much to my disappointment, the pituitary case inside isn't Pete Holmes, but Bo Burnham. I guess some of us came out of the pandemic better than others. They checked the vitals to see if there's any point in doing chest compressions, but it's obviously too late for that. Drone checks his clipboard and calls out for Skeezy Noggs. It's Skeezy Noggs, actually, says Skeezy, but Drone just stares. Skeezy Noggs is fine, I suppose. The fear in his eyes is palpable, despite the face paint, which is little more than a poorly executed hand turkey. He smooths down his glittering pink pageboy hairdo and hesitantly lurches toward the opening in the curtains. Well, he says, here goes nothing. Bust-a-Nut gives him a big thumbs up, and then through his gritted, toothy grin says to me,
And he's a dead man.
He takes another big drag on his smog device.
It's Maloney, right? As in Mitch? As in Mr. Mirth? As in the goddamn Lithuanian chupacabra? Aren't you?
I don't say a word.
So, what happened to you, man? I remember when you were on top of the world. Literally. Remember that? The whole set you did from the top of the CN Tower? Then you had that torture gauntlet special after your father kicked the bucket, and you turned it into goddamn comedy gold? Are you kidding me? That made No Cure for Cancer look like Gringo Poppy. How'd you end up at this gig?
But before I have a chance to come up with some kind of cover story, a screeching fire alarm goes off. Armpit turns to drone. Get the hose ready. The smell of burnt flesh fills the tent as Skeezy Nugs is pulled backstage and hosed down. In addition to being set aflame, he's been beaten with his own trombone. The long slidey part is twisted around his torso. Seems like every bozo who goes out there lasts half as long as the bozo before him, which, considering the fact that my time is coming up fast, is what we in show business call a negative indicator.
Well, I guess that means I'm up, says Bustinut. Got any advice before I face off against these maniacs?
You go get 'em, you old sandpaper-throated yuck huckster. If any bozo in this tent has the ruthless aggression this crowd craves, it's you. But almost as soon as he goes out there, a bloodthirsty brouhaha erupts on the other side of the Kevlar curtain. He only lasted about 10 seconds. I guess they didn't dig the Vulgarian bit. I wonder if maybe it's not that the comics are getting worse. Maybe the mob is getting more and more bloodthirsty. Looks like it's my turn to walk the plank. I stand and give myself a little Elvisian warm-up shoulder shake and head toward the stage to my true home. Of course, I haven't written out any sort of set. When you're as endowed as me, improvisationally speaking, you can just wing it. I figure I'll riff on something I like to call the joke mind virus for 15 to 20, and then do another 10 to 15 on chump derangement syndrome. But that all goes right out the window when the curtain is drawn. I step forward, and the first thing that hits me is the stench. Dear Lord, the stench. The second thing that hits me is a half-full can of Razzie Jazzberry Ultra MAXXED Testosta-boosted Dude-fuel. The third is the blast from a Roman candle. Some big shot FCs might look down their noses at a crowd like this just because they're a dirty, stinky mob of idiots. But I know better than to underestimate my audience. Besides, trashy morons are my number one demo. And the harebrained hoi polloi here at the gathering only want the same thing any audience wants: wicked sick riffing and dank-ass truth bombs. So I do my best to ignore the blood and viscera that decorate the stage, and then I look down and realize I've got a pretty serious gas grill and testicle situation, which might throw off a less seasoned performer.
Sorry to cut in here, Mitch.
Well, if it isn't the audio engineer.
Well,
I was starting to worry you'd fallen asleep in there.
I think you might have misspoken.
And when was that exactly?
It sounded as though you said gas grill and testicle situation.
Yes, and?
Well, I'm assuming you were probably referring to a gastrointestinal.
You don't think the mutant tent at the gathering of the Q-uggalos is gonna have at least one gas grill fired up on stage?
Okay, but how did you...
Did you hear me say anything about wearing pants?
No, but
Do the math, Darberius. The next time you're thinking about interrupting me, do the math.
All right, copy that.
So like I was saying, once I disengage my genitalia from the white-hot cooking grate, my showbiz instincts take over, and I think of the rangi-tang, not the boring, peaceful ones in the preserve in Sumatra who, frankly, just between you and me, had no real act to speak of, unless you count foraging twigs and picking gnats off each other an act. I'm thinking of the one that made me want to live among them in the first place. That one-of-a-kind simian master entertainer that absolutely crushed it for a crowd of tourists at the zoo that I mentioned back in chapter 14. This crowd isn't interested in clever wordplay or even general concepts. They're post-verbal, and I must devolve in their direction. They might be unwashed, unstable, socially maladapted, staggeringly ignorant, generally detestable. What was I talking about again? I'll put it this way. If this festival is a circus, then the crowd in the mutant hut are the smashed pachyderm patties in the hay. If I don't reflect their anger, I will become their target. So what I need to do right now is sink right down to their level. Such is the task, nay, the burden of the professional chuckle-chucker. So I conjure my inner ape man and do exactly what I saw that orangutan do. I blow chunks all over the stage. Unfortunately, half-digested deep-fried lasagna isn't quite the showstopper as that neon green puke that monkey at the zoo had on tap, and the crowd's reaction is casual indifference. I figure maybe lapping it up like the orangutan did will do the trick. And then I hear something from the crowd. Scattered cries from around the tent to show them my bunghole. Within seconds, a large portion of the mob is chanting bunghole, bunghole. So using my preternatural instincts as a performer, I pivot and bend at the waist. Upside down between my knees, I can see the crowd cheering as I open my cheeks for their primitive pleasure. Even though I've strayed a bit from my typical act, I try to stay focused. I remember what Lewis Black said, just relax and breathe through your ass.
Endnote 4.
Then something catches my eye, a banner waving slowly near the back of the tent, yellow with a black stripe running from corner to corner, and a crudely stenciled depiction of a half-wolf, part-alligator, wearing a hunter's cap. It's the Lithuanian chupacabra, my long-abandoned alt-right persona from back in my yellow onyx days. I guess some ideas never die, no matter how stupid they are. Or maybe they keep going because of how stupid they are. Then again, I'm the one on stage spreading my butt cheeks for a tent full of mouth-breathing inebriates. If I were to wipe off this space cat makeup right now, I wonder if these yahoos would even recognize the face of Wade Dinklington. I suppose in some parallel universe, one of Jeff Dunham's what-if alternative worlds, I stuck with the whole Lithuanian chupacabra bit, and am the king of the Q-uggalos. Or maybe they're demented Uncle Sam. But in this world, where decency and democracy thankfully have prevailed over bigotry and ignorance, the Lithuanian chupacabra is just a shadow of a memory of an idea, a mascot for their fantasy football team in the big game between the slobs and the snobs. Suddenly there's a sharp sucking sound from the back of the hall, the whistle of an object flying towards me. Upside down through my spread legs, I see the calm trail of a small pineapple-shaped projectile, and then the sudden impact against my exposed sphincter as it finds purchase. I turn and retrieve it, a hand grenade, somehow diffused by its buttocks capture. If I had to guess, I'd say the source of the attack is the person holding the grenade launcher, wearing a brown leisure suit and a paper bag with 3 holes over their head. The classic look of the unknown comic. Just like the 2 hoodlums that beat me up and shut down my velvet painting museum/comedy club in Lipstick City. What is it with these bagheads? What is their big beef with Mitch Maloney? This baghead rushes out into the middle of the crowd and shouts out, in a voice that sounds almost exactly like Wanda Sykes, whose voice I could completely nail if I wanted to, but I'm not going to do it because I don't want my audio engineer to fire up the cultural sensitivity filter. She shouts out, "Sic semper malus cometus," as she lights up the tent with a second incendiary device. "Oh yeah?" I shout back. "Well, quid latine dictum sit altum videtur," which is a little inside joke for any Latinos who might be listening to this, which apparently isn't many, 'cause I don't get much of a laugh. Plus, everybody's sort of preoccupied with running around in a hysterical panic, trying to flee from the flames and everything. Moments later, those of us that haven't perished yet are standing outside of the burning tent. I look up towards Stone Mountain. It's the first time I've seen the statue at night. It sure is something, you gotta admit. 10 feet taller than Lady Liberty herself, they say, jutting from the giant crest of granite, towering above the festival grounds, directly above the massive effigies of Jackson, Davis, and Lee. An enormous gleaming monument, elegantly rendered in gold, plated tin. A massive idol of their idol, as he was last seen in public at the conclusion of his trial before being transferred to the Mar-a-Lago suite at Guantanamo Bay, strapped to a hand truck with heavy chains, wearing a straitjacket over a jumpsuit and a muzzle mask. It's lovely the way it twinkles and glows, lit from below by the flickering of multiple fires across the festival grounds. It's not just the mutant hut that's been attacked. The Papa John's Extreme Freedom Arena and the Cold Stone Creamery Defiant Deplorables stage are also engulfed in flames. And the You Might Be a Red Hat If Jeff Foxworthy Memorial Pavilion has already burned to the ground. 6 glowing black triangular objects, each one as big as, let's say a mid-sized Midwestern chuckle hut, like Zinger's in Sheboygan, for example, appear over the dark, starry horizon, and then pause and hover silently over the park, as if they're sizing up the scene. No hum or whir of machinery, just eerie silence. Could it be Trantifa? Or the Swifties? Is this a coordinated attack from the bagheads like the one that burned down the mutant hut? No, that must be a coincidental collaboration. And I'm not the kind of guy to jump to conclusions, but I'd bet everything I've ever owned that it's space aliens here to conquer and enslave the human race. There's simply no other explanation that I'm willing to entertain. Those silent hovering triangles are some kind of alien technology, or my name isn't Mitch Maloney. 4 of them circulate over the festival grounds, impervious to the thousands of rounds of ammunition being fired from the passels on the ground. Their bullets have no noticeable effect, as the UFOs drop powerful explosives that are evaporating everything in their vicinity, wiping away the last remnants of the Q-uggalo ideology. It's a whole lot of death and destruction, the most I've seen since the SS Mayhem. But looking on the bright side, if all the passholes in the mutant hut have been incinerated, that means no witnesses. No one to tell the tale of the night Mitch Maloney puked his guts out on stage, then lapped it up again, then spread his bunghole for an extended period of time. All for a cheap laugh from a depraved mob of incels. This whole humiliating episode will be lost on the breezes of unwritten history, unless I spoil it because I can't keep my mouth... Oh. Well, I guess that's why they call it a tell-all. The other 2 triangles are hovering near the base of the statue, pelting the massive shackled ankles with some kind of photon pellets or something, causing black smoke to billow from the base. There's a deafening, groaning noise, like the skies being ripped open. The statue tilts forward, teeters uncertainly, and then hurtles downward, gaining speed as it cartwheels down the face of the mountain, crashing past the Confederate carving. It's such a mesmerizing sight I didn't even notice the object hovering directly above me, but I feel the tractor beam lifting me up, sucking me gently toward an open hatch in its underbelly. So who knows what's next for Mitch Maloney? If I've learned anything in my career, it's that you never know what the next chapter might have in store. But I think it's safe to say it's probably gonna involve some probing. As if my butthole hasn't already been through enough today.
This audio edition of Unstoppable Farce, the Mitch Maloney story, was made possible by the Seventh Reformed Church of Latter-day Witnesses, the Bleepers.